to hell down here in Texas.
Oh, yeah. What is up, everybody? Welcome to the show. This is episode 231 of the Lone Gunman Podcast, and I am your host, Big Bad Bob, otherwise known as Rob Clark, here with you today. Goddamn levels. What's up? It feels good to be back in the saddle again, and just some real talk before we start opening this episode here, entitled Descent into Madness, the mostly true story of a first-generation researcher's downfall. You know, obsession is never really a good thing, be it with people or ideas or material items. These things can often lead to a very bad situation. And like with anything else, there have been many folks over the years who have become obsessed with trying to solve this case, to be that person that finally puts all the puzzle pieces together and truly solves the case. Many people and many great people have met their maker before seeing this dream become a reality. And I'm no different. I'll probably be 6 feet in the ground before we figure anything else out. But again, with anything else, obsession can ruin your life. Not only your personal life, your private life, your work life, your reputation. Becoming paranoid. Becoming aggressive, becoming obscene, can seriously mar one's character and reputation in this world among their peers and their family and their friends. And like I said, it's never a good thing. Never. And it has affected many people in different lines of research. You know, and I'm not just talking about JFK research, 9/11 research, the Oklahoma City bombing, just about anything that people look into. There's been certain individuals who have become obsessed with the facts of the case and trying to figure it out, becoming a nuisance, just doing all kinds of crazy stuff along the way. And today we're going to be looking at the tale, and I've mentioned him on this show before, regarding something else, but never really fully dived into his entire story, which we're going to do today. And it's about a man, a researcher, a first-generation researcher named Ted Gandolfo. Now, you probably haven't heard about Ted Gandolfo. He did write a book but it was mainly a compilation of newsletters. And in the 70s, during the HSCA investigation, he became really obsessed with the FBI, the CIA, and Robert Blakey in particular about not investigating the case thoroughly. And like I said, he was a very interesting individual. And the earliest that I can pinpoint Ted Gandolfo's foray into the Kennedy assassination is in mid 1967. And apparently he was at work doing things interested in the assassination on his own, going back to November of 1966. But we'll get to that. So in 1967, he sends out a newsletter to some very prominent first generation researchers. It's entitled A Search for the Truth. And it says a recent survey shows that 67% of the American people do not accept the conclusions of the Warren Report that Lee Harvey Oswald, acting alone, killed President John F. Kennedy. President Johnson has placed all of the evidence, including the x-rays and the photographs, in the National Archives in Washington, telling us that we, the citizens of this country, cannot see this vital information until the year 2035. Ridiculous. This is a democracy, and in a democracy, the people make the decisions. In a democracy, we have the right to act. We can demand the president open up the files and let us know what really happened on November 22nd, 1963. We can demand that our Congress pass legislation so that we can find out who killed our president and why he was killed. I loved my late president and the things he stood for. That is why I have undertaken this project alone and unaided by anyone or any group. At my own expense, I have had these circulars printed. I prefer it this way. All I desire is to get as many names as possible and bring them personally to Washington in petition-like forms. So please, don't throw these circulars away, but pass them on to your friends. Please, please help me in this effort for the truthful evidence in this case by sending me your name. Although I will never communicate with you in any way, you have my heartfelt thanks beforehand. Thank you, fellow Americans. Sincerely, Ted Gandolfo. Okay? Now, he says he will never correspond in any way with people that answer this letter, if you want to call it that. More like a statement or such. But it closed with Harold Weisberg's copy of this circular as a handwritten letter dated September 17th, 1967. Dear Mr. Weisberg, I received your book and your letter. Thank you. In your letter, you asked for a clipping of Rankin's statement in which he stated that it would be enough if the commission could prove that only 2 shots were fired. You said that he made that statement in the New York Times about Christmas of '64. Looking around through my organized and chronologically listed clippings and documents, I was unable to locate that one. And he goes on for a couple pages. And it's, of course, handwritten, which I hate trying to fucking read on the air, so we will skip to the end, where he also includes a partial listing of tape recordings. Now, everybody's got a niche in the Kennedy assassination. And Ted Gandolfo's niche was audio and video recordings. Okay, mostly audio. And of course, this was a big thing back then. And he has a listing here, and I won't read all of them, but I'll give you an idea of what's going on here. So from November 22nd, 63, he's got from CBS TV, Walter Cronkite and others in New York and Dallas, Texas, report bulletins, and first news of assassination attempt of President Kennedy out of Dallas. Very important tape, 2 hours. Excuse me. November 1966, from Channel 5, WNEW TV special, The Warren Commission Pro and Con, featuring Mark Lane, Edward Epstein, Wesley Liebler, Richard Rover, Bert Griffith, plus a moderator, 2 hours. November 12th, 66, Channel 5, WNEW TV special, JFK Assassination, A Minority Report, featuring Harold Weisberg, Mark Lane, Leo Savage, Penn Jones, Jacob Cohen, and Jim Bishop as moderator, 3 hours. November 26, 1966, The Alan Burke Show, WNEW, Channel 5, Mark Lane is a guest. December 1966, Alan Burke Show, WNEW, Channel 5, Marguerite Oswald is a guest, 2 hours. Man, I wish we had some of this stuff still around today that somebody could digitize, but he goes through a lot of this stuff. He's even got up through July 1567 listed on here. For example, June 26, 1967, William Gervich, Garrison's investigator, quit staff, CBS TV News. Gervich tells his reasons. June 26, 67, WMCA Radio, Barry Gray hosts Mark Lane, Emil D'Antonio, Stanley Rebrandt, and attorney Joseph Lowenthal, 2 hours. So this is the kind of thing that our boy Ted Gandolfo was into back in the day as a first-generation researcher. On September 20th, 1967, Harold Weisberg decides to write Mr. Gandolfo back. Many thanks for the time and trouble in locating the ranking quote. Sorry you haven't found it. After all this time, it is possible my recollection is unclear, but on the fact of his having made the statement and my having seen it in the Times, I am certain he said it. Your listing of tapes is promising looking, and your files of organized clippings may be very valuable. I hope you preserve them intact. Perhaps someday they can become part of an archive. I will remember your invitation, for which I am very, very grateful, and possibly sometime I can accept it. What I'd like to do sometime when I have to stay overnight in New York is visit you that night and see what you have. Mark Lane has left the New York area. Where he will make his permanent residence, I don't know. I heard he was going to teach in Stanford, and then heard he was going to go to New Orleans for the duration of the trial. You have a number of tapes that I do not. I'm glad to know what you do have. On your flyer, may I suggest that it not precise to say that everything in the archives is denied everyone. By now, I'm confident that more than half of its material is accessible to qualified researchers. Many thanks for your efforts. My thanks also to your wife. Keep up the good work. Sincerely, Harold Weisberg. So that is at 1967, folks. Now, in the ensuing years, Mr. Gandolfo is a very tenacious and aggressive proponent of the truth. He works his way onto what's it called, public access TV, where he has his own TV show where he tries to get guests on there and to interview them. He submits articles to a ton of countrywide news magazines, including one that was published in the New Yorker, actually. And he also appoints himself as chairman of the Assassination Information Committee located on First Avenue in New York, New York. So, like I said, he's a very tenacious guy. He creates a committee to look into the assassination. He creates a public access TV show. He buys time on radio shows. He is very into news clippings and audio recordings. And in later years, once technology is caught up, video recordings. So this article that he writes for the New Yorker is entitled "Tapes Disprove the Warren Report." And he says the Warren Report's conclusion that Lee Harvey Oswald was the sole assassin of President Kennedy was the result of a blatant misrepresentation of the known facts, evidence, and until recently, suppressed commission documents themselves. According to the earliest TV accounts from Dallas, which were truthful ones from an on-scene reporter, the commission's conclusions subsequently reached bore no serious relationship to what actually occurred on November 22nd, 1963. What follows is a small sampling of chronological, verbatim accounts of media reportage derived from the actual NBC TV tapes in my possession. So he goes through here and points out a couple things, which we're not going to hit them all, but just for example, 3:09 p.m., Mary Mormon started to take the picture as the president became right even with us. 3 shots, we looked at him, and he was looking at the middle of the street. 3 shots rang out, and he grabbed his chest, and a look of pain on his face, and fell across towards Jackie. And she said, "My God, he's shot." And there was an interval, and then 3 or 4 more shots rang out. Questioned by a reporter, "Did you see the person who fired the shots?" The answer, "No, I didn't see any person fire the weapon. You only heard it?" "Yeah, I only heard it, and I looked up and saw a man running along the top of the hill." And this was Gene Hill's statement to a Dallas reporter at 3:09 p.m. And it just goes through a bunch of stuff. Or once again, I believe this is the actions of an overzealous researcher. He goes through and states some points and says that action. We do not recommend the discussion of the assassination question be initiated where it is not already taking place. A, to discuss the publicity problem with liaison and friendly elite contacts, especially politicians and editors. B, to employ propaganda assets to answer and refute the attacks of the critics. Book reviews and feature articles are purpose. There is more to this document, but the above portion is an indication of the phenomenal power play by the CIA to rebut honest, valid questions of a provably false and fraudulent Warren report. I am of the firm conviction that this country will remain a nation of, by, and for our people, as our heritage so proudly proclaims, if and only if we find out finally the truth about who killed John and Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. Then and only then can we be successful in the prevention of future assassinations of the great political leaders of our times. Only then can we truly be free. And this is from July 9th, 1977, folks. Now, accompanying this article in the files of Mr. Harold Weisberg is what qualifies, in my eyes, as a loony, cuckoo, letter to Robert Blakey. I have an important opening statement to make, Bob, to you and all your listeners. It will be the most important statement I've ever made in more than 300 radio and TV shows I've done in the last 3 years. And it relates to questions which go to the heart of the functioning of this government. In specific terms, it is the question of whether or not the people of this country will finally be granted their right to know the truth about the assassination of John F. Kennedy. On assassinations, which has absolutely convinced committee investigators of a definite conspiracy, this evidence includes tape recordings of conspiratorial meetings in New Orleans, a confession from one of the participants of these meetings as an accessory on tape, hours, dates, places, trips to Dallas in preparation for the murder, absolute verification and corroboration, maps specifying the firing zones, photographs of participants in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. The House Committee has already conducted neutron activation and spectrographic analysis of the bullet fragments in the JFK case, and those tests proved beyond a question that more than one rifle was fired at the president. Because of this and much more, conclusive evidence of conspiracy, committee investigators have begun to rebel against the chief counsel, Robert Blakey, who has and will continue to suppress all of this conclusive evidence because he is dedicated to securing a position high up in the criminal division of the Justice Department, a position which was mentioned 2 months ago in the Washington Post. The committee investigators did want to come forward with this information and evidence, but they are not allowed to do so because they were all forced to sign non-disclosure agreements, which prohibit them for life from disclosing any information they secure under penalty of being fined $5,000 and sent to prison if they disclose it. Blakey has already recently fired 2 committee investigators, Robert Lerner and Donovan Gay, because they dissented and rebelled with Blakey's suppressions and cover-up of the overwhelming conspiracy evidence they had seen. Blakey is covering up this evidence, and he must not be allowed to do it. We, my fellow private researchers, and I are asking, in fact, pleading with everyone within the sound of our voices to write or cablegram or telegram the chairman of the House Committee, Congressman Louis Stokes, or to me, and I'll see to it they reach him immediately. I'm demanding this atrocious non-disclosure agreement be abolished so that the people of this country will be granted their right to see and hear all of the evidence of the conspiracies in the JFK and King assassinations, and to insist and demand that Chief Counsel Robert Blakey be fired immediately by that committee. And this letter was sent to Louis Stokes, who was the chairman of the House Select Committee on Assassinations. So, yeah, here we go, folks. Gandolfo was very vocal during and after the HSCA investigation that Blakey was corrupt and suppressing evidence, and claimed that he had proof of this in the form of audio tapes, confessions, and real evidence. So, to fast forward a couple years, and you want to know how to get on the, well, if they had one back then, the no-fly list, the hey, we're going to watch you now list, we'll just send a crazy letter to the President of the United States. October 18th, 1982. Mr. Ronald Reagan, President of the United States. Dear Mr. President, I'm sending you this letter in the hope that a grave miscarriage of justice may yet be rectified. It involves the fact that very crucial evidence and information relating to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy has been and definitely was entirely suppressed and covered up by HSCA in general and by their chief counsel, Robert Blakey in particular. I will refer to just one of many items of evidence in this regard. On February 11, 1978, I had a long conversation with former New Orleans District Attorney, now Judge Jim Garrison. During our conversation, which I tape recorded, he told me that the House Select Committee had sent a team of investigators headed by Mr. Cliff Fenton to Mr. Garrison's office to secure the evidence that Garrison had accumulated during his investigation of the JFK assassination. Garrison told me that as a result of the committee's investigators viewing and hearing this evidence, that they were all convinced of a massive conspiracy to murder JFK. Garrison also told me that these investigators also obtained from New Orleans and also Clinton tape recordings in which the assassination of JFK were being discussed by, among others, voices which were identified as being contract employees of the Central Intelligence Agency. And on these tapes, they were discussing how they were going to assassinate President Kennedy in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. This evidence was completely suppressed in the House final report, and in fact, Mr. Garrison was not even called to testify before the committee at all. I'm certain you will agree that this matter should be immediately brought to the attention of the Justice Department so they may conduct a full investigation into this most important suppressed information and evidence so that the interest of truth, honor, and justice may fully be served. I will be only too happy to send you a copy of this most important conversation between Mr. Garrison and myself. Therefore, I implore you, sir, to write to me as soon as possible regarding the above information, which I trust you'll agree with me is of the most vital importance. I'll be awaiting your, I sincerely hope soon, reply. Respectfully yours, Ted Gandolfo, Chairman of the Assassination Information Committee. Yeah. Now, a month after writing that letter to the president, there's a note in Weisberg's file that said, Ted Gandolfo phoned me a little afternoon to tell me about a week ago a man had phoned to say that something was going to happen to his wife, and that today it did. She left for work, did not get there. They had not heard from her, and he phoned the police, who had no report about anything happening to her. HW 11/29/82. I guess this is some seemingly ominous information that something happened to his wife. Not sure exactly what, but later on in December of 1982, I have a letter that Ted Gandolfo sent out to Weisberg, Sprague, Mae Brussel, his brothers, John, Paul, his mother, Edith, and yada, yada, yada. It says, hi all, firstly, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year from us all in 83. These are pretty rough times for me and Anita, as you know by now. No one can be certain of what the future holds, of course, but hopefully all will turn out okay in the end, hopefully not too distant in the future. At the present time, I have a tremendous set of personal emotional problems, which must be dealt with firstly, and I hope effectively. Then, perhaps, and hopefully, I'll be able to get into the mainstream again and function as I should function. Hopefully, that day will not be too long in coming. Anita has been, in a word, terrific. A real godsend to me in these most difficult personal times. In addition, your best wishes and prayers are also much appreciated. Thank you for everything, really. I'll communicate again in a little while when I'm feeling more better. Thanks from Anita and myself. Sincerely, Ted Gandolfo. Same December 1982. 2 days after that one was sent. He says, it's to the same people. This is quite different. This is a quite different typewriter, so I made mistakes. I'm going through a very difficult period in my life now. It is a process of evaluation, priorities, self-analysis, etc. I was recently taken completely off my medication, which I've taken for 5 years now, and the result was devastating to say the least. My anxiety attacks became so horrible and bad that I thought I would go completely bonkers. Now they have restored a new medication to me, and I'm feeling a little better because of it. I have been told that they probably would not be able to determine the causes of my 5 years of getting anxiety attacks, but that they would finally be able to help me when I get them. So it's better than nothing, I guess. I have no idea how long I'll be able to stay here, but I've heard that this hospital doesn't keep you for more than 2 or 3 months. I hope not. This is a very difficult time in mine and Nita's life. We'll need your prayers and good wishes. Hopefully all will be okay soon. Best regards and write me soon. I'm lonely. Ted Gandolfo. All right, so now apparently at the end of 1982, Mr. Gandolfo finds himself mentally deteriorating and in a hospital, suffering from quite bad anxiety. So fast forward a couple of weeks, now we're in the middle of January 1983. And I believe Mr. Gandolfo is ready to hang it up as a JFK assassination researcher, and he is ready to donate his collection to a university. Okay. Now, for whatever reason, and I don't know that he has any ties to this university whatsoever, but he selects the University of Wisconsin at Stevens Point, where he wants to donate his stuff. So we have a letter now from actually another assassination researcher who you may have heard of, named David Rohn, Wrone. And he apparently works at the University of Wisconsin, and he happens to be the one that's answering Ted Gandolfo's letter. Dear Ted, thank you for your recent letter concerning your tape-recorded and printed files on the assassination of President Kennedy. I was distressed to read that you are ill and suffering from severe financial problems. I trust that all will eventually work its way out for you. In consultation with the Dean of our Learning Resource Center, I can report to you on the several questions you asked me. 1. RE, the question of your donation being an income tax deduction. The IRS prohibits an institution such as the University of Stevens Point from making an estimate of the value of a collection and giving it to any person or institution. The IRS says there must be an evaluation of the collection by a certified evaluator. Once that certificate is executed by the evaluator, it is given to the donor, which in this instance would be you. In our city of Stevens Point, there's a lady who can and has performed this task before. We would take this list of materials to her, and she would place a value upon it and give the certificate to you, and you would then be able to use this document for your tax purposes. Since you are going to be giving us your material, without charge, we would pay for the certification and have it forwarded to you. Shipping costs, we meant also package, transportation, and postage. However, we would wish to see the list of materials before we could tell you which form of transportation to use. We would, of course, pay for the shipping and transportation of your materials to us. We must know how much materials you have to determine the amounts and arrange for the certification. Thus, please send a detailed list of what all your material consists of, both printed and taped. We await your reply at your earliest possible opportunity. Sincerely, David Rohn. So now Ted writes back with a detailed list, which says, Dear Mr. Brown, received your letter today asking for a detailed list. Here we go. Taped recordings. I have 225 7-inch reels of tapes, 4 tracks for size on each tape. I have 43 5-inch reels of tapes. I have 79 cassette tapes. I have 10 1-hour long videotapes on 1/2-inch reels of tape. These tapes total approximately 4,300 hours in total time. Each tape is in a box with written listings inside boxes. Printed documents, 1 box, 2.5 feet across and 1.5 feet high, 1.5 feet wide. 1 box, 1 foot high by 1 foot long by 1 foot wide. 1 box of House Select Committee documents, 2.5 feet long, 1 foot high, 1.5 feet wide. 1 large dresser drawer full of documents, letters, etc. 2 very large, thick scrapbooks. I have 60 books regarding the JFK, MLK, and RFK assassinations, and that is a detailed listing of my materials. I would appreciate an evaluation. I want these income tax deductions listed under my wife's name is Anita Diageo. Since I am unable to work, unemployed for reasons of health, and she claims me as her dependent. I would prefer to have all my materials transported to you by truck or car rather than the mails, if possible, as to prevent loss or theft. I'll be awaiting your evaluation. Also, do you provide boxes? Respectfully yours, Ted Gandolfo. Now, in the middle of all this, Ted writes Harold a letter, 1984, February 19th. Enclosed, you'll find some important previous correspondence between the University of Wisconsin and myself. R.E. my materials. I would appreciate it very much if you would look this correspondence over and let me know if you think the amount for income tax deductions they are offering me is a good or even a fair one for all my taped and printed materials or not. Please read it carefully and take your time and let me know by mail if you think it is an equitable amount they are offering me. The reason I'm asking your advice on this is obviously because I'm very unknowledgeable about these things. My wife thinks that for the vast materials I'm offering them, she thinks their amount to me is too small. What do you think, Harold? I'll abide by what you say in response because I respect your judgment. Thanks a lot for doing this for me. I appreciate your indulgence. Sincerely, Ted. So he writes back, Dear Ted, I've gone over what you sent me and it appears to me to be in order and the best that they can do. They are limited to what IRS accepts, and so is the appraiser. The only point of comparison I have is one item where I've sent them Xeroxes, and at this end, I was told the identical thing, 10 cents a page. With the books, it's impossible to know without a list of them and knowing their condition or rarity, but I am certain that if this can be appraised upward, they will see to it. I've known Roan for years, and he is an honest man. However, also bear in mind that on your end, it must bear IRS scrutiny. And if they have any reason to have any questions, you'd have troubles. Tell Anita that Nixon saw to it that all such things would be on the low side and examined with care because of the crooked things he tried and in which he got caught. Or do you and she remember that stink? That appraiser, who also had a big professional reputation, got into a lot of trouble and hurt himself by it. You can depend on it. If any of it can be given a higher valuation, it will be. Hope you're both well. Best, Al. So, a month later, March 1983, Mr. Gandolfo, we are happy to accept your materials on the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Our response has been delayed due to the untimely illness of the appraiser. Her health is now restored, and we can proceed at this time. Enclosed, is a tentative evaluation of the materials as described in your previous letter. The book estimates will be revised upon careful scrutiny of the volumes. The attached evaluation is only an estimate. Upon receipt of the materials, their value will be officially certified by the appraiser, who requires that the materials be physically in her hands before executing the document. The income tax deduction certificate will be listed in your wife's name, Anita Biagio. We eagerly await receipt of the materials. Please package and ship the materials as soon as possible. We are sending you by United Parcel 20 boxes and the necessary packaging materials. Enclosed is a check in the amount of $200 to cover your expenses and labor involved in assembling the packages and shipping the materials to us. Sincerely, David Roan. And the estimate included for all of his stuff is the tape recordings, the 225 reels of 7-inch tape, $2,936.25, the 43 reels of 5-inch tape at $745 each, $320.35. Printed documents, 19,500 sheets duplicated at 10 cents a sheet, $1,950. Audio cassettes at $156 each, 79 60-minute cassettes, $123.24. Video cassettes, 10 60-minute half-inch cassettes at $16.91 each, $169.10. 60 volumes of books, $360, for a total estimated value of your entire collection, sir, to be $5,858.94, which basically estimates to be a base level estimate of the costs incurred by Gandolfo to do all this. This is at the time, a 7-inch reel of tape costs $13.05 each. They're not estimating the value of what is actually on the documents, on the recordings, on the cassettes, or the books. So again, the final quote may have been higher, but the estimated value is $5,858.94. So we know Gandolfo is in poor health, unemployed, dire financial straits, ready to give all this up, get rid of his collection, write it off on his taxes, and move on at this point. 1983. Now, for whatever reason, I don't think he followed through with this. I think at the last minute, he probably told himself, I can't part with my collection. And his wife was probably like, God damn it. But, because, as you'll see, we'll get there, I promise. But let's fast forward to the year of our Lord, 1986, where he sends Larry Strauderman a letter. Now, Larry Strauderman is the information and privacy coordinator for the Central Intelligence Agency. Once again, if you want to get on the radar, start hassling very important people. Dear Mr. Strauderman, enclosed, please find my most recent newsletter entitled Assassination USA, which is sent out bi-monthly to more than 2,700 subscribers across the country. As you see, the lead cover story and the revelations it contains is the primary reason I'm sending it to you and your agency. The devastating information published herein will no doubt speak for itself. This story, revealed here for the very first time anywhere in any publication, is entirely true in every aspect and is completely documented and corroborated by the enclosed and indeed other corroborative evidence in my personal files and possession and elsewhere, where I have submitted it all and placed it in the possession of several persons, should mine ever become, quote, lost. or in some way confiscated by whomever. I am a more than 23-year private researcher on the JFK assassination and have appeared as guest expert on more than 250 radio and TV shows, including my own hourly, weekly cable TV shows in 1977 and 1978. I have also compiled the largest all-inclusive tape-recorded library in the world on this case, numbering more than 5,000 hours at the present and continuing. The reason I'm sending you the enclosed information is in the fervent hope that you or anyone else in the agency will respond to the information contained herein, hopefully as soon as possible. If and when I receive a reply from the agency, I will be only too happy to publish it in my next newsletter for the edification of my many subscribers and listening audience during radio shows I am still appearing on, re this case. Should I not receive a reply or any response at all, that in and of itself will be reported by myself as well, and will in fact be indicative of certain things relating to a lack of deniability regarding this matter from you, the agency. I await your hopefully soon reply and response eagerly. Sincerely yours, Ted Gandolfo, Chairman of the Assassination Information Committee, New York, New York. Yeah, probably not the best idea to threaten the CIA, Ted, but that's just me. And you heard him mention in there that he has over 5,000 hours of audio tape and continuing. That's what makes me think that he didn't go through with his submission to the University of Wisconsin. Or if he did, he copied everything and gave them copies, which is a little disingenuous, but I digress. Then we move on to December of 1986, in which I have a copy of Ted Gandolfo's newsletter, his Assassination USA newsletter, that is, that goes out to his 2,700 subscribers, with copies sent to Blakey, Garrison, Sprague, Lane, Wecht, Russell, Paul Hawk, President Reagan, CIA, the Justice Department, FBI, the U.S. Congress, and several magazines. This is a very special holiday edition. Jim Garrison completely vindicated. Absolute proof that Robert Blakey, chief counsel of the House Select Committee, deliberately covered up Garrison's evidence of direct CIA involvement of the JFK assassination on orders from his actual employers, the CIA. I now have conclusive proof that this evidence of direct CIA involvement in the crime was supplied by Jim Garrison to Cliff Fenton, who headed a 5-man investigative team for the committee, and this conclusive, overwhelming evidence of direct CIA involvement in the crime was then given personally to Blakey, who completely suppressed all of it from the citizens of this country, indeed, peoples of the whole world. So apparently, on September 20th, in 1986, Ted Gandolfo interviewed his nemesis, Robert Blakey. Now, this is, of course, 7 years after the HSCA disbanded and published their findings. And kudos to Blakey for even taking this guy's phone call at this point. Now, directly from the newsletter, the interview went a little something like this. I began this conversation by asking Blakey about one of the assassins we have nicknamed Frenchie. He refused to comment to my question about him, and now for the crucially important dialogue concerning HSC investigator Cliff Fenton, who Dick Sprague, my friend, who is the photographic genius of the case, who told me that Blakey would never discuss with anyone in the past. The relevant dialogue follows. Gandolfo starts. I also contacted Jim Garrison And he said that a team of investigators headed by Fenton received from Garrison evidence definitely proving a CIA conspiracy to kill Kennedy. Blakey says that's false. Gandolfo, excuse me? That's false. Gandolfo, that is false? Yes. Gandolfo, well, that's what Garrison said. Blakey says, well, that he said it, I don't doubt. That is true, I deny. Gandolfo, you deny that that's true. In other words, Fenton's team did not come back to the committee with evidence from Garrison. Blakey says, no, we talked to Garrison. Gandolfo said, oh, you did? Blakey said, sure, but there was no evidence that the CIA was involved. Gandolfo, Garrison did not present you with that evidence. Blakey said, look, I appreciate you calling me, but I'm not available for interrogation, son. Gandolfo, no, I'm just, and Blakey says, I've given you all the information I'm going to. Garrison's allegation that the CIA was involved in the assassination and that he proved it or offered evidence proving it to the Assassinations Committee is false on both grounds. Gandolfo says, on both? Yes. Well, I'm just saying what I was told by Mr. Garrison. Blakey says, well, I don't care what Mr. Garrison said. Gandolfo, yeah, well, Blakey said, I'm just telling you what happened. We talked to Garrison. He did not prove the CIA was involved, period. Oh, you did talk to him. Blakey said, yeah, shithead. I just told you that 2 minutes ago. No, he didn't say shithead, but yes. Gandolfo, you mean Fenton's team, right? Blakey, yes. He talked to a number of people, including Garrison. Gandolfo, yes, and of Fenton's team, did they report any information from Garrison? Blakey, yes. Gandolfo, was it published? Blakey, in part. I don't know that everything he said was published, but just about everything he said. The substance of what he said was published, yes. Of what Garrison said? Yes. Can you recall anything? Blakey, I am not available for interrogation, son. No, I'm merely. Hey. Yes. The conversation's over with unless you want to ask me another question on another subject matter. Gandolfo, all right. I don't know what to say because, Blakey says, well, don't say anything else, but goodbye then. I love it. You see, you go in ill prepared, and this is what happens. You get your ass handed to you, folks. Yeah. And I don't know what Gandolfo was trying to prove. He even printed this verbatim, word for word, in his newsletter that he sent out to people. Like, I don't know if he thought that he had Blakey in a gotcha kind of moment, but to me, it sounded like Blakey handed him his ass. Now, after receiving this newsletter, Harold Weisberg felt compelled to write Ted. Dear Ted, in your own interest, I must be blunt with you, or you will make a laughing stock of yourself from coast to coast. You hung up when I told you that the CIA's advice to the HSCA to disregard the so-called tramp pictures was good advice. This was when I told you that Dick Sprague had made up the name Frenchie for one of the men in the pictures because to Dick, his clothes appeared to be a French cut. If you dig out your old copies of Computers and Automation, you'll find that Dick himself said this. You said that there will be someone from the CIA on the WBAL radio show to be syndicated. If there is, he will know the truth, and you will be the biggest spectacle your side of the Statue of Liberty. And as it happens, you can check some of this with Jim Garrison, who should remember. This is because there became a time just before the Shaw trial began when he had been booby-trapped by Bill Boxley, a former CIA named Woods. I worked like hell on it, and as his own assistant, Chiambra, told me for him, saved Jim from a real disaster. Part of Boxley's nonsense was these irrelevant pictures. First of all, the men were not tramps. That was also Dick's invention. They were winos. That they were picked up and walked past the TSBD had nothing to do with the assassination, and it was at least an hour later. They were trespassers, found in a boxcar about 3 blocks away, and the only way to walk them out was past the TSBD. Those men have been identified as just about everybody except Muhammad, Jesus, and a couple of his pals. All identifications were the imaginings of some so-called critic. If I remember correctly, and Jim should, the first of these made-up identifications was that one of the men was Edgar Eugene Bradley, then working for the right-wing preacher based in New Jersey. I think Mark Lane made that one up. Frenchie was, I think by Sprague, identified as LBJ's farm manager. I could go on, but my only purpose is to protect you from your own stubbornness and ignorance, and to keep you from making the CIA look good on a coast-to-coast hookup. You just can't go around and accept an unquestionable truth what somebody else made up, particularly not when there's a chance that somebody who knows what the official investigation shows, and there surely was one of those wild imaginings, will be in a position to dump on you like you've never imagined. I take this time when I should have gone to bed only to save you from yourself. Be stubborn, don't believe me, and see what happens. That's the 80s equivalent to fuck around and find out. And I told you the truth about how the government works. You may not like it, but it's the real world, not whatever you dream up to replace reality. If you've ever had any experience in government or watching it carefully, what I told you would be obvious. So you can check me by 2 phone calls to Jim and to Ken Bruton, who, as I told you, phoned me after Sprague was forced off the HSCA to tell me that I was Merlin, remembering the future. Nonetheless, asking the executive agency's questions is normal, and for them to reply is also normal. The replies you read me are, in fact, much as you do not like them, good advice, and you'll really be clobbered if you go into the other one too. Even if there is nobody from the CIA on the show, if there is anyone on the other side, you best fear that he'll be primed and ready to take you out. Now, as we wrap up 1989, apparently Ted Gandolfo had asked Harold Weisberg to set him up with a high-ranking media news source because he was claiming to have some explosive evidence in the case. Dear Ted, as you know, I'm not well. This is not one of my better days, but when you phoned to ask for help, I tried to help and was able to present you with the best possible assistance if you had lived up to your end. I fear that you have jumped to some kind of utterly irrational conclusion and did not have the good sense to at least speak to me first. In any event, I was unwell enough to lie down, having told my wife to wake me if I got a call. I'd asked Alcorn to phone me after he spoke to you, and I was surprised that he had not. I phoned his office, and he'd gone for the day. I was also surprised at not having heard from you. So I phoned you, and you refused to speak to me. No explanation why. You have phoned me at all kinds of inconvenient times, but I've never once refused to speak to you, as you well know. Aside from being impolite, you are very irrational. If Alcorn said something to offend you, or if there was something about him you did not like, you could have told me, and I could have phoned Woodward. Bob Woodward. He knows me, as does his former sidekick, and both have in the past called on me for help. There were good reasons I didn't go into with you for my asking Alcorn to do it rather than doing it myself. And it involves a tip that Woodward got some years ago and mentioned to Alcorn, and about which, and as I told you, he and Alcorn are to meet next week. That he did not phone me as he said he would, and I asked him in order to see if I could give any further help, leads me to believe that you blew up at him over something. I knew you can do such things because you have told me of doing them. I don't know whether or not you realize how much I can add to what you are trying to do, but I sure as hell will not with any kind of situation as this. Aside from what it would be if Woodward were to do the story, what the Post would do with it, and would do with it if it did anything, have you any idea how many copies Woodward's books sell? I have enough to give him to make a book for him because I started a book on that subject some years ago and since have obtained a considerable amount of relevant information. I'm surmising, of course, but I think of your refusal to speak to me and what you have told me yourself about yourself. I do fear that you blew up, that it was irrational, intentional, and that you are your own worst enemy. I'm sorry that you were able to behave this way, and I'm sorry that after all these years, you were able to do so. Sincerely, Hal. So apparently, Weisberg set up a meeting with one of his contacts to help him out, and for whatever reason, it didn't happen. And now Gandolfo won't even take Weisberg's phone calls. Not sure what's happening here. And we're into 1990 with a special edition of the Assassination USA newsletter by Ted Gandolfo. I sincerely hope and trust that you, my many subscribers, will bear with me at this time for what I will here relate. Let me preface it by saying that 2 months ago, my house was broken into while my wife and I were at a hospital for my bad back. Upon our return home, we discovered that a bit more than $14,000 was stolen, in addition to approximately 40 video and audio tapes. It was obviously a black bag job, which the FBI and CIA are famous for. At any rate, since we had only a little in our bank, unfortunately, it depleted our financial savings for the most part. Then, to make a long story short, I was contacted by my mother, who informed me that my younger brother John had died from the cancer, which had contracted all throughout his body. He had just turned 52. Since we all know of the large cost of a funeral, and since my mother and I and wife Anita were virtually bereft of any money to pay for his funeral, with this problem in existence, I resorted for help to several of my fellow long-term JFK researchers. They came to our assistance magnificently, to say the least. Among those who immediately sent me anywhere from $100 to $200 were Richard Sprague, Judge Jim Garrison, Mark Lane, Dr. Cyril Wecht, and Harold Weisberg. Because of their financial assistance, I and my mother were able to have my brother buried in dignity. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to repay any of them back yet, but I will do so as soon as Anita and I get back on our feet. I know that by divulging this, I may well cause embarrassment to these friends and colleagues, but I've always felt that the good deeds of people should be made known to others. So I beg their forgiveness should their embarrassment ensue. Now that I've said this, I'd like you all to know my very personal opinions of these. I feel strongly great patriots of this country. They are indeed patriots because they did not, lemming-like, adhere and conform to the national security while our national honor was at stake, relating to the events surrounding the assassination of our beloved President Kennedy in Dallas, Texas on November 22, 1963. So we have Gandolfo in the hospital with a bad back. His house gets broken into by what he terms as a CIA or FBI black bag job, where certain things are stolen, including money and audio and videotapes. And he elicits funds from his fellow JFK assassination researchers. Which is pretty sad that this guy has no fucking friends other than these random JFK researchers to rely on to help him out financially to bury his brother. Wow. I mean, that in itself, okay, you've been researching the case for 25 years at this point, and you were so engrossed in your life with this thing that all you have is fellow researchers who you probably never met, who all across the country. You've corresponded with them, and that's who you look to. That's who you solicit for funds. Ugh. So by now, news of the Oliver Stone movie being made and coming out is happening, and things are, of course, dug up from the past. And we have a rival newsletter called The Investigator. And I believe it's put out by a researcher named J.G. Rowell. And this article is entitled The Garrison Gandolfo Smoke and Mirrors Show. I like the title, The Garrison Gandolfo Shit Show, much better. But here we go. Ever since that first electrifying news of Jim Garrison's Kennedy assassination probe flashed around the world, I had been a staunch advocate of support for the embattled district attorney. While I did not always agree with his pronouncements or tactics, I felt that eventually his New Orleans-based Kennedy investigation would shed valuable new light on the murder conspiracy. However, developments in the past several years have changed my position about Mr. Garrison. Mr. Garrison? I, for one, am still waiting for Mr. Garrison to reveal the evidence needed to convict the late Clay Shaw in an open court of law. I will grant, though, that the Shaw case was a difficult one to prosecute, given the restriction that the prosecutor was required to show genuine evidence. The point is moot now, however, as the Shaw trial is ancient history and Mr. Garrison has moved on to judgeship in a new storm of controversy. For it appears that Mr. Garrison has opened up yet another smoke and mirror magic illusion show with Mr. Ted Gandolfo to shill for him. The Garrison-Gandolfo duo have proclaimed that there exists tape-recorded proof of conspiracy, yet they have failed to provide one shred of actual evidence. Who says you can't go back to the good old days? In what seems like a bad case of deja vu, I'm reminded of a Herblock cartoon at the front of a Rosemary James and James Wardlaw book, Plot or Politics, The Garrison Case and Its Cast. The cartoon, which is entitled New Orleans Strip Joint, depicts the Jolly Green Giant Jim Garrison dressed in his underpants, shoes and socks, doing a fan dance under signs that declare sensational disclosures, too sensational to disclose, and startling revelations that cannot be revealed. Yes, indeed. Tape-recorded proof of conspiracy, too sensational to disclose and too startling to reveal. But let me start at the beginning of my interest in this particular aspect. Years ago, I had acquired a tape of Mr. Gandolfo's Assassination USA radio show that featured a conversation with Mr. Garrison about a taped confession from one of JFK's plotters. Since I had never seen anything in print about this taped confession, I wrote the following for the November 22nd, 1981 issue of Penn Jones, the Continuing Inquiry newsletter. The source of information about the confession comes by the way of New Orleans former District Attorney Jim Garrison. This important tape confession and the possibility of a cover-up in the New Orleans end of the JFK investigation were the topics of discussion between Garrison and broadcaster Ted Gandolfo in a February 1978 telephone conversation about Blakey. Blakey, as you'll recall, was appointed to the chief counsel slot of the HSCA in June of 77, and by February 78, his tactics were beginning to show through. The following excerpts were taken from the conversation between Garrison and Gandolfo as they centered in on the solid progress made by the New Orleans field investigators and the lack of response by Blakey on the progress that they made. Garrison, please emphasize. No, I'm not going to do Garrison voice. Please emphasize, because I'm well aware of the discreditation the national media has done. Please emphasize that my inclination has been not to get into the act, that I don't seek publicity, that I'm leaning over backwards not to. But I'm well aware of the developments here because I've turned over so much material. We went far beyond the Shaw case. That was just an incident. We were right there, but went far beyond that. And the material I've turned over to these men, they've gone far beyond where we went. And I have been astonished as the months passed and silence comes from Washington. They have meetings in which they're specifically discussing the assassination, with Shaw and Ferry president. The details. Gandolfo, you talking about Perry Raymond Russo thing? Garrison, no. Since then, they've gone beyond that, into new areas we hadn't reached yet. We had the right people, but we didn't have all their meetings. They have a fucking confession from one of the guys participating in the meetings. As an accessory, on tape, hours, dates, places, trips to Dallas in preparation. It's corroborated by 1,000 things that I've sent up. Why haven't they taken a deposition from him in these months? They've left him available to be killed. Gandolfo, the person in the Bannister office? Garrison, yeah. Gandolfo, yeah, I think I know who you mean. I think he may be. Garrison, well, let's not guess over the phone because it may be monitored, but the point is they just leave him available to be killed as the months pass and they don't take his deposition. Garrison not only attended meetings in which they planned the assassination in detail, they even sent him on a trip to Dallas just before the assassination to give to meet with one of the other people involved and to give him maps and photographs. Garrison, well, at least if they kill him, they'll hurt themselves because it's all on tape now, and it'll be hard put to ignore what's on tape of a man that's been killed. So, in light of the above conversation and the fact that the existence of the confession tapes has never been publicly acknowledged, then it would appear as though a person could reasonably draw one of the following conclusions. A, the confession tape doesn't exist and that former New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison is lying. I personally do not believe that Mr. Garrison is lying. B, that the confession tape does exist and that a thorough HSC investigation on the matter has led to the conclusion that there is no truth in the confession. Or C, the confession tape does exist and that it has been suppressed by Blakey. A smug Blakey has stated, I'll rest on the historian's judgment 50 years from now when everything becomes available. I'll rest on the historical judgment that is made on us in 50 years. Since the article appeared in 1981, Mr. Garrison has been silent on the matter, while Mr. Gandolfo has continued to beat one drum of CIA conspiracy on Mr. Garrison's behalf. I have waited for approximately 9 years for evidence to surface from either Mr. Garrison or Gandolfo to prove any of their claims. This wait has been in vain, in spite of the fact that Mr. Garrison has subsequently written an article for Freedom magazine entitled The Murder Talents of the CIA, and a hardcover book called On the Trail of the Assassins, while Mr. Gandolfo has written his self-published The House Select Committee on Assassinations cover-up. As I understand the situation as it exists at this time, there are supposedly at least 2 tapes in the possession of the HSCA. Both were allegedly in the custody of Cliff Fenton, who allegedly passed them to Blakey. The first tape allegedly consists of a confession given by Jim Hicks during the ill-fated Shaw probe. According to Mr. Gandolfo, Jim Hicks testified to the grand jury that he was a signal operator to the assassins that day. He further stated that Jim Garrison gave the tape to the HSCA and he retained no copies. The second tape allegedly are conversations of the actual plotters planning the Dealey Plaza assassination. Not much is known about their origin or how they came to be in Jim Garrison's possession, but Gandolfo claims, yes, I heard the plotters' tapes with Garrison, and no, I don't have copies. Blakey put them in the National Archives. In Cover Up, Gandolfo wrote, they, Cliff Fenton's 5-man team, secured tape-recorded conversations in which the assassination of President Kennedy was being discussed by, among others, people whose voices were identified as being contract employees of the Central Intelligence Agency. Gandolfo stated in November of 1986 on the WPLP radio show that the voices on the tapes belonged to Clay Shaw, David Ferry, William Seymour, Emilio Santana, Jack Lawrence, Fred Lee Chrisman, Jim Hicks, Jim Braden, etc. Hey now, here's the rub. According to Gandolfo, Jim Garrison gave the tapes to the federal government and did not retain any copies. Are we to believe that Jim Garrison had tapes that could provide undeniable proof of a conspiracy and that he didn't make any copies? Especially since Mr. Garrison has expressed such disdain and distrust of the federal government all these years? Are we to believe that Ted Gandolfo listened to these tapes with Mr. Garrison and made no effort to secure a copy of these for his vast audio tape collection? Perhaps the day will come when the actual tape recordings surface and prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that they really do exist, but until that day comes, the Garrison and Gandolfo claims will have to remain just another smoke and mirror show. Interesting. Now, for those listeners to my show who have been listening for quite a while, going back to almost the very beginning, you know the story of Mr. Thomas Beckham. Thomas Beckham was a New Orleans witness, testified in the grand jury. Didn't really say much then. And I got in a pissing match with Jim Garrison about something really insignificant and was kind of shuffled around. Now, fast forward to the HSCA investigation. When Beckham was interviewed by investigators from the HSCA, he told a completely different story than what he told Garrison in 1967. What he told investigators for the HSCA lines up very well with what Garrison claims to have audio tapes of. Beckham goes into a meeting at G. Ray Gill's office with several of the conspirators. He also goes into the fact that they sent him to Dallas with maps and pictures to meet with Lawrence Howard, who was another one of the alleged participants in the assassination of JFK. What is never mentioned by this guy, Gandolfo, or Garrison is the name Thomas Beckham. Now, would be pretty cool if Garrison had said who gave him these tapes, but he doesn't say that it was Beckham, which means maybe it wasn't. I don't know. I'm just guessing. I'm just saying that Beckham's story that he relates to the HSCA matches up with what Garrison said was on the tapes. So now we move on. July 3rd, 1991. Ted Gandolfo called me this morning for the first time in 2 years. If there was a special purpose in his call, I didn't really perceive it. He is pissed off at Oliver Stone and his movie, and he quotes Garrison as somewhat disenchanted. He had not seen any of the critical newspaper accounts, but heard of George Lardner's story and referred to it as good, citing Sprague as his source. He says that Garrison told him he has little or no input, that Stone wants people to stay away from him, and that the plot is at best indecisive, or whatever this means. You can take it either way. Garrison has told him he would send Ted a copy of the script, but hasn't. In fact, he'd not heard from Garrison for some time. The last time was when he arranged for Ted to let Stone have a dub of a tape conversation with Garrison. Stone told Ted he would be using only Garrison's voice from it. In that conversation, Ted says Stone told him that Paul Hawk, Jerry Rose, and Robert Groden were hired on as consultants. Stone also wanted a tape Ted has of sounds and emotions, supposedly immediately after the shot. The only one I remember is not genuine. Ted says he has done a 220-part videotape history of the case and that PBS is interested in it. He says it and WNET offered him $1,500 for it, and he demanded $3,000, both very low for any serious TV uses. He has heard from Mark Lane about Lane's finally arranging for the publication of a book he wrote on a case in which he defended Willis Carto in Spotlight, I think against the suit by E. Howard Hunt. It is currently titled Reasonable Denial and is to be published by Loudmouth Press. Ted is to get a copy of the uncorrected manuscript and the book. I asked him why he never sent me a copy of Garrison's book after telling me that Garrison had given him copies for which one was for me. Ted says he thought he had sent me a copy, still has it, and will send one. Last time I heard from him is when that book appeared. Harold Weisberg. That was just a note to himself. Sometimes you find these notes to himself in the Weisberg files. July 91. Dear Ted, I'd expected to hear from you by now on authenticating the tapes. As I indicated, I think there are possibilities you did not refer to. But as I'm sure I said, it all has to begin with validating them. This means, among other things, being able to establish how your Mr. X came to have them. You and him should expect to be doubted for reasons we both know well and from experiences of the past. So before I do anything else, I have to be satisfied about their authenticity and how they got from Fritz to your Mr. X. The pony of the Pony Express you are using to get that copy of Garrison's book to me must be older than I am. Best, Harold Weisberg. P.S. If I do not hear from him after making it clear, I guess this is a note to himself. If I do not hear from him after making it clear that authentication is essential, the possible explanations include that there is no authentication and that he was trying to set me up for Garrison for revenge. He and Garrison were close. At the same time, it never did make sense that Fritz would question Oswald about killing JFK and not have a record he could use if he got a confession later retracted. So I had suspected that Fritz had indeed taped Oswald's interrogation secretly. Now, what we're referring to now, Ted Gandolfo claims to have, or claims he can get, or claims to have heard, a secretly recorded by homicide, Chief of Homicide Will Fritz, and that he had secretly recorded Oswald's interrogations. and that he knows someone that has a copy of the secret recordings, which would be explosive if true. I mean, imagine it, folks. I mean, that's like the holy grail of the case right there, for sure. July 9th, 1991. Dear Harold, this is extremely important info, and I think you know better than most what to do with it. To wit, I was informed last night that the tapes of 12 hours of Oswald's interrogations, which were secretly recorded by Dallas Captain Will Fritz, will be released soon by someone who has direct copies of them, whose name obviously cannot be revealed at this time. I don't recall if I mentioned this fact of their recordings to you before. I seem to recollect that I once did. I was originally assured that I myself was to be given them by Mr. X, but he has reneged on this for his own reasons. So, with them, I was going to call a New York Press Club conference and play some of it, etc. I was also told that these tapes were in the hands of several people for safety's sake, which I can easily understand. I have been up practically the whole night thinking which researcher could provide the best nationwide publicity when this event occurs, and I have decided after much thought, indeed, that you, Harold, should be the one to do it. Obviously, when this story breaks, its repercussions will be devastating, to say the least. But I thought that with your media connections, you can best inform them of this development so that it can be handled the right way. Although I obviously cannot say too much about this development, if you know anyone, which I'm sure you do, who wants to talk to me about it, they can reach me at the above phone number or address. Think it over, because this will be epic dynamite. I'll defer to you on this one, Harold. Okay? Okay? Yours in struggle. Ted. Now, at this point, folks, Harold Weisberg's been burned a few times by our boy Ted. So I think he's stepping into this very carefully. But when you dangle a big enough carrot in front of that mule, a big orange piece of dynamite carrot, of what could be, if true, the actual secretly taped recordings of the Oswald interrogation, that would be freaking epic to have. But as I said before, Wildberg's not a stupid man. Dear Ted, this is July 11th, 91. I remember your phone calls about these recordings of the Dallas police Oswald interviews of several years ago better than you remember any of your promises to send me a copy of Garrison's book, the most recent, only a few days ago. I remember also that you blew the introduction I had arranged to you, and there's tapes, by not listening to me when I told you that your demand for money would defeat you, and it did. I know Bob Woodward, but I arranged a better connection for you then. He'll remember and won't talk about it now, so he's out. Too bad, because he is in charge of the Washington Post investigative reporting. He would have been the best. In recent years, I've lost most of my contacts with the media. George Lardner of the Post, you won't like because Garrison did not like his reporting, and when I was informing him to expose the House Assassins Committee, you were hung up on them. I don't know if he'd be interested or if the Post is now keeping too busy on stories that are exposing the CIA to get interested if he wanted to. We disagree from time to time, but we know each other fairly well, and he knows more about the JFK assassination than any reporter I know. There is a problem to begin with that if I were to make any effort to get those tapes and your Mr. X any attention would have to be addressed up front, establishing their authenticity. For most reporters, that would begin by your Mr. X explaining in a way they'll accept about how he came to possess these tapes. I recall some of the things you told me about them when you started phoning me about them from Michigan. This is probably because if they are genuine, they are at least as important as your letter says. If he can't do that, you and he should expect skepticism to begin with, even if they are genuine. Some of the things you had heard Oswald say, like the names of people and agencies with whom he was connected, can tend to give credibility to the tapes, but also to be faked and the tapes made up, as some reporters may wonder or believe. They have to be skeptical, as do their papers or other parties of the media. If they were used and turned out not to be genuine, all the media will begin by understanding they'd be in trouble and would be hurt. I can think of some things that can be done, but first I have to be satisfied about their genuineness and not just that you think they're genuine. If they are not the real thing and are used, they will also undermine even more the credibility of all criticism of the official mythology. If they are not the real thing, I have to think of my own reputation too. So let's begin by establishing by hard fact that they are genuine and how Mr. X has them. Sincerely, how? That's kind of important, don't you think? A little later in the month, July 91, dear Ted, I've just received 2 undated clippings from the New Orleans Times-Picayune, copies enclosed. One says that Garrison has been hospitalized for about 2 weeks, beginning on July 9th. It has a picture of him in which he looks terrible, to be deathly sick. That picture was taken only a few days after you told me he was fine, that you'd been in touch with him, and he told you that he'd had pneumonia but had gotten over it. I asked you how he is because I'd received an unconfirmed report that he has cancer. Your misrepresentation brings into question several other things I think you should explain, but frankly, I don't expect you to. When I asked you how Jim is, you'd phoned to offer me alleged tapes of Will Fritz's questioning of Oswald. You then told me that only I, among critics, could use them most effectively. You also claimed not to remember whether or not we'd spoken about those tapes before, when in fact, beginning when you said you were in Michigan listening to them, we'd had a number of conversations about them when you phoned me to discuss them. Among other things, that makes me wonder whether or not you're up to some kind of trick, but remembering also that you've been seriously ill, I did not assume that you had to be up to something. I then wrote you and said that before I do anything, I'd have to have their genuineness confirmed. When I heard nothing, I wrote you again, and you did not respond. This does suggest that either on your own or on behalf of someone else, you were trying to booby trap me. I believe that if you knew these tapes were valid, you'd not be sitting on them or offering their use to anyone else. The last time we spoke, I reminded you that you told me before Garrison's book appeared that he told you he'd send you 20 copies, and from them you were to send me one. I then wondered why he did not have the publisher do that, but whatever. You must have told me 20 times that you were going to send me a copy. Once that Anita forgot to mail it, and you never sent it. The last time you phoned, I reminded you, but you said you'd send me one of the 4 you have and didn't. Because as Jim knows, publishers do send copies for authors. I believe Jim, in fact, did not want me to have a copy, and your behavior confirmed that belief. Then I was loaned a copy. I read it and knew very well that Jim did not want me to read it or say anything about it. I was involved in some things about which you know nothing, but Jim knows very well. He lies about them in the book. What he was not about to tell you is that I saved him several times from worse disaster than he suffered. I do not expect you to believe it, and I'm not going to take the time to prove it to you, but he was going to commemorate the 50th anniversary, the 5th anniversary of the JFK assassination by, among other things, charging Robert Perrin, who had killed himself in New Orleans in 1962, with being a 1963 Grassy Knoll assassin. This is why he fired Bill Boxley, who had gone out and made up proof for him. I have copies of the work I did and some of the investigations made for me by his own staff investigators, that he should have had make them and didn't because he knew very well that he'd made this whole thing up. That time with the Shaw case before the Supreme Court, one of the staff lawyers told me whether or not it's true that I'd saved Jim from being disbarred by the Supreme Court. If I had ever intended doing Jim any harm, do you think I'd have been silent about this, about what goes with it, and about other such incredible adventures that would have done legitimate criticism of the assassination investigation so much harm? What Jim made up himself, he blamed on the CIA. He said it had infiltrated Boxley onto his own staff to do this kind of thing to him, when in fact it was Jim Garrison personally who hired Bill Boxley over the strong objections of his assistants. I have the memos on it, so you can believe me or not. So, if you have any self-respect or personal honesty left, you will explain yourself. If you don't, then for the record, as lawyers say, that will speak for itself as well. Boom. All right. One thing you just don't want to do is fuck with Harold Weisberg. I mean, you'd think people would know that by now. Not all people are monsters. Okay? And as we progress here, you'll see in this next letter that, even Harold Weisberg has a soft spot in his heart for human beings, other humans, despite what they've said or done to him in the past. At this point, they've had a 25-year relationship of writing back and forth, sharing information. And even though Ted has fucked Harold over with bullshit, time after time after time again, you'll see that the actual humanity that Harold Weisberg possesses, when once again Ted Gandolfo snowballs Harold Weisberg. Fast forward to March 1992. Dear Harold, thank you kindly for the very nice things you wrote to Anita regarding me about. It's appreciated. We've received quite a few orders for my self-produced 18-hour videotaped history of the JFK case, as advertised in Cutler's Grassy Knoll newsletter, so it will greatly help Anita's paying for my funeral. I was told by doctors that I have 2 months to go at the most, so I taught Anita how to make copies of the 18-hour sets. As like yourself, I've received quite a few letters of sympathy from many subscribers and colleagues like you, Lane, Polikoff, Sprague, Mars, even Gene Hill, etc. Well, Harold, I've always thought that it's not that important when you go, but rather what one does whilst he is here that really counts. I received a 2-page letter from Stokes answering my letter to him, R.E., him and others releasing the HSCA files, and the CIA, FBI doing the same. Of course, you're quite wise enough to know that when and if they do, they're not ever going to release anything at all which might be detrimental to themselves. That's a given. Obviously, nothing that might in the least incriminate them in anything. So all we'll probably get is going to be another either manufactured documents and obviously highly much sanitized or censored materials at best. Dick Sprague has written to also tell me that Stone is going to do a sequel to JFK, and that he'll go into the HSCA investigation, etc. So, since I won't be around by then, I'm preparing a package of tapes and my HSCA cover-up book and other important documents I'll have, so he'll give them to Oliver Stone for the next movie. I do have some good stuff there. Too bad I can't see it when it comes out. Oh well. I guess one can't have everything, right? I hope this letter finds you and yours in as good health as possible. My right kidney is killing me from the extremely uncontrollable diabetes I have, which is doing me in. Anyway, just wanted to thank you for your letter to Anita, and also, most assuredly, for our friendship to and fro through the years. May you and the missus stay as well as you can Please say hello to her for me and Anita. Thanks, friend, for everything, and God bless you. Best regards, Ted and Anita. So, Gandolfo has just told Harold Weisberg he's got at best 2 months to go. Apparently, he's in the last stages of kidney failure. So, Harold writes back, Dear Ted, as trite as it seems, and no matter what the odds, it remains true that where there is life, there is hope. So let us hope for the miracle your doctors do not expect. I could have died from the first venous thrombosis I had in 1975. I could have died from the mistakes made when I had a plastic artery placed in my left eye. I almost did twice. The second time, the surgeons working until 2 a.m. had not expected me to survive, as they told me the next day. There were 2 emergency operations after the insertion of the plastic artery. The local cardiologist did not tell me what he told my family doctor, that he did not expect me to live through the open heart surgery that I had in 1989, but I did. Sure, I was lucky. I still hope I'll continue to be this lucky because I was just told that I've had 3 small strokes. So, however long the odds, continue to hope. You lose nothing by it. You are as prepared as you can be. Try to live as close to normal a life as you can with the time you have left. I know what that means. I've been on borrowed time for many years. I do not mean to suggest that all medical problems are alike in this, and obviously they're not. But I do make the most of each day. And it does not hurt a bit to think of the good things we've done. So, despite what you say, I do, my friend, hope for a miracle for you. Sincerely, Hal. Gandolfo's obituary had appeared in the March 3rd, 1993 issue of Paul Hoch's journal Echoes of Conspiracy. Hoch invited his readers to send expressions of sympathy for donations to the late researcher's widow, Anita Biagio Gandolfo. In a recent letter, Anita Biagio Gandolfo confirmed her husband's passing. So, miraculously, folks, a month after passing, Ted Gandolfo is resurrected. In April of 93, copies to Lane Weisberg. Hello, gents. Yes, I'm still alive. I had to circulate the quote news that I died so as to provide anonymity for myself so that I could travel to somewhere to see some people pertaining to an important aspect of the JFK case you'll no doubt be hearing about in the near future. So it was worth it. Okay? Okay? Just thought you might want to read from an undated but very recent new newsletter that is making its rounds across the country. So somebody, of course, sent Harold this, even though he got his own copy. It says, Harold, is this Ted G for real? Or this is Cyril Weck. I wrote a letter of condolence to his wife a year or so ago. What do you know about his rigged demise? Cyril. I mean, there's not much more shittier things that you can do to your friends then fake your own death. I mean, what the fuck? And what spurned his resurrection was apparently Ted Gandolfo had finally seen the article we read earlier about the Garrison Gandolfo smoke and mirror show that somebody had finally forwarded to him. And he penned a letter directly to Mr. G.W. Roll, the editor of The Investigator. An open letter in rebuttal to J.G. Rowe's article by Ted Gandolfo. Mr. Roll, I have today received a portion of your undated Investigator newsletter, which includes a 4-page section entitled The Garrison Gandolfo Smoke and Mirror Show. Since this article represents a rather obvious attack on Garrison, who is now dead and cannot answer, and myself, who can, I think that in the interest of fairness about this, my rebuttal to your article be published in your next newsletter. To wit, upon recently reading your article, I discovered several inaccuracies in it, which I am compelled to rebut. Since these inaccuracies have the effect of contradicting us, B&G, as well as putting into question our veracity, a point-by-point rebuttal follows. So he goes down through, this, for instance, on the first page of your article, you state, Mr. Garrison has opened yet another smoke and mirror magic illusion show with Ted Gandolfo to shill for him. Well, if assisting a man who conducted the only truthful investigation pertaining to the assassination is being, in your terminology, a shill, I'll simply take it from where it comes and proudly rest it on my laurels. You stated that I have, quote, waited for approximately 9 years for evidence to surface from either Mr. Garrison or Gandolfo to prove that any of their claims are real. Question, since as mentioned above, this material has been suppressed in the National Archives for 50 years and are inaccessible to anyone, how can you blame us for our inability to prove any of our claims? Again, if you had explosive evidence on tape of a conspiracy by the conspirators, you'd think you'd make a copy of that shit before you handed it over to the federal government to put in the National Archives. Just saying. And he goes on in a 2-page rant. But this is what resurrected Ted Gandolfo. Now we're up to 1994, folks. Dear Harold, I have just today received your letter in which you are quite pissed off for something I know absolutely fucking nothing about. I let Anita read it too, and we both think you have sent me a letter which I never received. You may to respond to the simple questions I asked you about radio talk shows that might use my response to Posner and his dishonest book. That's what you just now wrote me, Harold? I never received any letter from you regarding this at all. So we agree that you must have sent me a letter about this which I have never received, or which your failing memory has eluded you, that you wrote me a letter, but you never actually did or never actually sent. You should know me better to know that if I had received such a letter from you, I would have done that which you asked me to do immediately and undeniably. Such is my immense respect for you, sir. But again, I never received that letter from you at all, so I couldn't naturally understand what you now wrote me about, obviously, if regarding this, what you wrote me that I never received. But anyway, if you still need my help in whatever matter, if you still need me, please let me know as soon as possible, and I guarantee you that I will do my best to assist you with it, Harold. I know that some of my mail has been fucked with, as I'm sending out tapes of my book to many people who have and are ordering them from me. And then I get letters saying they never received that, which I definitely sent them. So I guess you can credit the FBI for doing this to me. Please let me know what you request from me and I will immediately comply. Okay? Okay? Please also, in your hopefully soon letter to me explaining what I wrote, asked you about, are the news that I and Anita heard on radio and TV. What about this news story about James Earl Ray getting a new trial? I'd be most appreciative if you let me know what you know about this story we have just recently heard about. Hoping to hear from you, I remain sincerely yours, Ted. Oh, after receiving this and the little bit that I wrote before about the little note from Cyril Wecht about Ted Gandolfo's amazing resurrection, in May of '93, Harold wrote Cyril Wecht and said, "Dear Cyril, it is the real Ted Gandolfo. Only he would conceive of such a stunt, with such an invalid reason for it. I did not respond to his offer of a free VCR. There was no flyer in what he sent me, and it is apparent that we've heard nothing about his major event. If we hear, I doubt it will be even tenable. However, he is not capable of producing an all-inclusive total history of the JFK assassination. The last time he made such a big claim, he said he'd heard 8 hours of what Fritz recorded when he interviewed Oswald. That amounted to nothing. He told me he had the tapes in a bank box in New York, and again provided and produced nothing. Do I have to ask what kind of person pretends he is in terminal illness and then died? If I recall correctly, first asking for money for his wife? Maybe we'll hear further from him about this, maybe not, we'll see. And for your information only, I took a selection of Livingstone's menacing letters to the state's attorney's office, spoke to and gave them to an assistant who thought he thought there might be violations of federal laws in some of them. And I'm to hear further after she reads them and then talks to her boss. My hunch is that while he has violated the Maryland Code, they will be unwilling to prosecute because it involves a so-called writer and a so-called book. He was to have turned those manuscripts in 3 weeks ago. I'm reusing clear-sided paper, discarded pages, hundreds of them, of the new book. In fact, I drafted the whole thing on such paper. Maybe save a bit of oil, if not a tree, maybe some branches. Best wishes, Harold. To which was included an attention, a special addition to his newsletter from Ted Gandolfo. Ted Gandolfo produces historic, all-inclusive 22-hour videotape, complete 28-year history of the JFK assassination, available to you all at a very low cost. As the acknowledged tape master of the JFK assassination, I have recently self-produced the only complete, all-inclusive, historic 28-year videotaped history of this case, consisting of 8 sections. They are November 22nd through 24th, 63. 2. The actual eyewitnesses to the assassination tell what they saw and heard. 3. The Warren Report and its critics. 4. The Jim Garrison investigation. 5. The HSCA assassinations investigation and its critics. 6. David Lifton and Bob Groden's evidence of phony autopsy photos and x-rays. 7. September 1990, the Ricky White story. 8. The media's attacks against Oliver Stone and his JFK movie. I am making this never done before, complete, all-inclusive, total historic JFK assassination 22-hour videotaped in color documentary available to all for the very low cost of only $65. Please send check or money order payable to my wife, Anita Gandolfo, blah, blah, blah. Remember, truth is power. You'll treasure these videotapes for years to come. Oy. And in Probe magazine, this is August 1993, Probe magazine. Lee Harvey Oswald admitted his employment by the Office of Naval Intelligence and other espionage agencies, or so claims formerly deceased researcher Ted Gandolfo. Gandolfo made his assertions on Roy Tuckman's Something's Happening program, broadcast June 13, 1993 on Los Angeles radio station KPFK, a Pacifica affiliate. According to Gandolfo, Captain Will Fritz of the Dallas Police secretly recorded Oswald the entire 14 hours of Oswald's interrogation and then suppressed the tapes. Two assassination researchers reportedly now possess these tapes and will make them available at a major press conference on November 22nd, 1993. Every tree in the forest will fall, Gandolfo says. Speaking on the same program a week earlier, Robert Groden also referred to the secret Oswald's confessions. According to Groden, a right-winger has possessed these important recordings for a number of years. Dallas police have always insisted that they neither recorded the interview or took notes. Although he has not heard the tapes himself, but told Weisberg that he did, Gandolfo reports that Oswald admitted he was in the Office of Naval Intelligence, that he was a CIA contract employee with the number 110669, and that he was a paid FBI informer who was paid $200 a month with the number SI or S-172. Yeah. Gandolfo also played a telephone interview with the late Jim Garrison, in which Garrison reported that HSCA researchers had obtained a confession from a participant in pre-assassination planning meetings. Garrison felt that revealing this new information would get the investigators here, who are communicating with me, in trouble, and that they would get fired. I wish I could tell you how far they've gone, the progress they've made. It's past conspiracy. It's past prima facie. It's solid evidence on tape. But Blakey seems to have gotten cotton in his ears. According to Garrison, HSCA investigator Cliff Fenton had procured a taped confession from a participant in a pre-assassination planning meeting. Blakey, Garrison charge, suppressed this evidence. Gandolfo told the KPFK audience that the confessed assassination accomplice was named Thomas Beckham. According to Gandolfo, Beckham had provided Fenton with maps of the Dealey Plaza firing zones and the names of the conspirators, which included convicted Watergate burglar Frank Sturgis. Gandolfo reports that Beckham, acting under CIA auspices, sat in on a conspiratorial meeting held in held in No Name Key in the Florida Everglades. Other participants in these meetings allegedly included, you ready for this, folks? Harry Dean, Richard Case Nagel, Emilio Santana, Jack Lawrence, quote, a crack shot from the West Coast, and Jim Hicks. After Fenton submitted his reports, Blakey assigned two men to take Beckham's testimony. They scared him to death, said Gandolfo. They made him keep backtracking and backtracking. He knew that he was in hostile territory. The Assassination Archive and Research Center possesses a document written by Beckham in which he describes how, as a youth of 16 in 1959, he came under the influence of Jack Martin and Guy Bannister. Martin encouraged Beckham to adopt the pose of a priest in the old Catholic Church. His ministry was actually a front for anti-Castro Cuban activities. In the AARC document, Beckham states that he overheard Cuban rebels discuss the possible assassination of President Kennedy. After the assassination, Beckham became partners with the bizarre Fred Lee Chrisman, who had worked in New Orleans with Bannister and Martin during 1963. During his investigation, Jim Garrison received a purported internal CIA document which identified Chrisman as an intelligence operative assigned to domestic duties. A number of assassination researchers believe that Chrisman strongly resembled the eldest of the three tramps arrested on November 22, 1963. Garrison subpoenaed Chrisman to appear before the grand jury on November 21, 68. Chrisman, then living in Washington, had become a far-right radio commentator under the pseudonym John Gold. He evaded extradition, however. Reporters discovered that Chrisman and Beckham co-owned 7 businesses which employed no one and provided no goods or services. Chrisman told Seattle reporters that Beckham had functioned as a banker for the anti-Castro underground. Fred Lee Chrisman died in 76. Beckham still lives. An occasional country western singer. He may be operating under the pseudonym Mark Evans. So there you go. Gandolfo finally names the person responsible for taping these conversations. Turns out, Thomas Beckham. Now, this is all some 12 or 13 years after Beckham said what he said to the HSCA investigators. Now, what he's claiming is that Fenton and 5 others went down, talked to Beckham, got this tape, and then sent Burris and Delsa down to sequester Beckham in a hotel and get the now damning HSCA Beckham testimony, and that they scared him to death in doing so. Is this a true story? Don't know. Beckham never claimed in his HSCA testimony or his book to have tape recorded a meeting of the conspirators, though. If he had, I think he would have said so. But again, what do I know? Then we come up to looks like October of 93. And in this copy of the Investigator newsletter, which had attacked Gandolfo and Garrison before, decides to publish a piece by Gandolfo entitled Oswald's Interrogations Secretly Recorded by Ted Gandolfo. I first heard about Lee Harvey Oswald's 14 hours of interrogations being secretly tape recorded when I read about it in Robert Groden and Harrison Edward Livingston's book High Treason about a year ago, and decided to make this whole story up. No, I'm joking. I inserted that there. He says, I thereupon wrote to Groden twice about this, but I received no answer from him, oddly. I thereupon contacted many of my fellow longtime researchers, asking them if they knew about this story, and only one of them, named not to be disclosed at this time, knew about it. He said that these complete 14 hours of Oswald interrogations by the Dallas police were in the hands of 2 researchers. One of them he described as a right-winger, and the other a good guy on our side we'll call Mr. X. He said he traveled to see and talk to X, and that he was told that Oswald said certain blockbuster things during his questioning, that he was in the employ of the ONI, that he was also in the employ of the CIA, and was also a paid informant for the FBI. I asked this researcher colleague of mine if he was allowed to listen to any of these tapes, and he said he didn't hear any of them. But when he did say to me that when these tapes would be played at a major press conference that X would be giving in the near future, that every tree in the forest will fall. I mentioned the above information during my appearance as a guest on Roy Tuckman's Something's Happening program. I also mentioned the fact that I was told that Captain Will Fritz of the Dallas Police Department secretly recorded the entire 14 hours of Oswald's interrogation and then suppressed the tapes. That's the complete story as I know it, so we'll see. Editor's note. I investigated the matter a little further and was told by a reliable source that A, researcher Gary Mack knew the man who installed the tape recorder for Captain Will Fritz prior to the assassination. B, researcher Jack White and Jim Mars had talked to a woman who reportedly had confirmed that Fritz actually had the tapes. C, that Fritz was extremely mad at the FBI for taking over the case, and that is the reason he suppressed the tapes. D, researcher Robert Groden is in possession of a copy of these tapes, and that it has been rumored that Groden will be holding a press conference about these tapes during the 1993 Ask conference in Dallas, Texas. E, as Mr. Gandolfo always says, we'll see. All right, we're almost there, folks. 1994. Dear Ted, I can't tell when your 428 here today was mailed because the post office took offense at your reusing a stamp and didn't cancel it. Don't worry though, I paid your postage for you. Next time you write me a letter, make sure to enclose 75 cents. Petty motherfucker. As you gathered, I was both surprised and disappointed not from hearing from you. I don't know what that says. Says that there have been complaints about big chunks of mail not being delivered in several places. On your tapes, you know you can insure those for $50, for only $1, for up to $50 for only $1. Or are you just not sending them after people send you their money? I'd asked you about the shows you can contact that can air me by phone during the unusual hours I now have to keep. To be in bed by 6 p.m., but I'm up too early and can, for example, do late night West Coast shows. Some of them go on after I'm up, usually about 1 a.m., but it takes me a little time to get going as well as I now can. I know there are daytime talk shows in New York, and those I hope you can make some arrangements with. My case open book, about 20 to 25% of what I wrote is out about a month now, and have not arranged a single show. It does the job of Posner so well the publisher figured that they could get the rest, which does even more of a job on him, out entirely. Of course, I can do interview shows that are taped. My limited supply of copies are now gone. While I did not believe that Oliver Stone would want it to have anything to do with me because I am reasonable, for the publicity that made it clear his JFK movie is not nonfiction, as he said, and I guess he got pissed off. He goes on, he says, I have no confidence at all in this supposed new James Earl Ray stuff. I really do not believe it, and from what I know, it does not check out with the existing facts. Blah, blah, blah. His lawyer, Bill Pepper, formerly a friend of Mark Lane, is now practicing in London and living in England. Blah, blah, blah. Nothing in the paper, they buried it deeper than Lane did, like Crying Wolf. If they get something, the courts then will ignore it. Best Herald. And the last bit of correspondence we have from Ted Gandolfo. Dear Harold, sorry for the delay in answering your latest letter. R.E. Posner, but I've just gotten today out of the hospital where I stayed because of my very high sugar diabetes. Harold, when Posner's book first came out, he was to be on WBAL or WBAI radio here in New York, and the station manager wrote me about his going to be on and his knowing of my credentials in the case. He told me to call in and straighten Posner out with the facts. I called up, and to make a long story short, in 20 minutes, I proceeded to give the lie to his lies, so much so that I left him actually stuttering all over the place at the end of it. Harold, so why in hell are you concerned with his nonsense at all? He is undeniably a paid propaganda asset, disinformation puppet for the CIA. Anyone who knows anything at all about the case, as you most certainly do, to say the least, knows that he's full of shit anyway. So it's like debating another asshole like, say, David Beelan or any of the other bullshitting apologists for the Warren Commission or for the HSCA, isn't it? So as for Posner, his own words, he says everywhere, does him into anyone. So why bother with him at all, Harold? But if you're so inclined to do so, you can write to WBAI FM radio and address it to Mr. Bob Fast there, and I'm sure he'll allow you to speak on the air on one of his shows. He is on Thursday nights, starting at midnight. Phone number is this, and arrange for him to call you back. That's what I suggest you do, Harold. I'm still sending out tapes, newsletters, and my HSCA cover-up book, so I'm still out there informing the masses. 3 newsletters have advertised me, so business is very good, and I'm kept pretty busy nowadays. Hoping this finds you and the missus okay. Best regards, Ted. Now, that letter, the last one I wrote to you, is the very last correspondence between these 2 researchers in the Weisberg archives. I have looked high and low, folks, for any information regarding Ted Gandolfo's passing. We know when Harold Weisberg passed, and I believe it wasn't until the early 2000s, but I can find nothing on Gandolfo past 1994. So it appears he may have either dropped off the face of the earth or passed away. But either way, at the very end, when you have lived a life of deceit, lies, and promises not fulfilled, the only person you can count on, likely, is yourself. And that is where you're left, is with yourself. So, piece of advice to all those out there interested in the case: do not become so obsessed with it that it consumes your soul. Make sure you make time to spend with your family. Make sure you make time to follow your passions in life other than trying to solve the JFK assassination. Like if you like to play golf, make time for golf. And if you like to go fishing, go fishing. Spend time with your kids. Do good things. Keep your brain healthy, folks. Then you'll be around much, much longer and have many, many more friends. Follow along on Twitter and TikTok at The Lone Gunman 7, on Facebook, The Lone Gunman Facebook page, and on YouTube. Search for The Lone Gunman Podcast page. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell to get notified when new episodes drop. Till next time, peace.
All that I can say in Black River, it shit, I'm out.